I didn't hear the clink of the champagne flutes so much as feel their cold permission in the room. The table was a long mirror of glass and tulips and money, the kind of place where people lean back after dessert and pronounce other people's lives like verdicts. My daughter raised her glass. "To chosen family," Rachel said, smiling the way people on magazine covers smile when they know the camera loves them. "To the people who make us happy." There was a polite chorus of hear-hears. Someone laughed too loudly. The candles trembled with the air conditioning. Rachel looked down the table at me as if I were a name she couldn't place. "And to new beginnings," she added, turning the stem of the glass with her fingers. "Some changes are overdue. We'll talk about the details, Mom, but the realtor says the closing papers are already signed. You won't have to worry about that old farmhouse anymore." The word signed hit the water in my chest and sank. Chairs creaked. The men in sport coats shifted their elbows off the linen. My fork lay shining and clean on a plate I wasn't finished with. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding like someone else's voice. "What closing papers?" "You're moving next week," Rachel said. "A beautiful place near Lake Champlain with a shuttle to town and people your age. They have pottery classes and chair yoga. It's time." I looked down the table and saw her fiancé, Brian, glance at her with the sick smile of a man who has agreed not to disagree in public. Her boss, a woman with straight hair and the varnished stillness of money, dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. My neighbor Thomas, Quiet Thomas from next door, who wore denim shirts and walked the boundary between our properties with a cup of coffee every morning, sat at the far end, not touching his dessert. He lifted his eyes to mine, and something in them steadied me like I'd grabbed a rail on a moving train. "Rachel," I said, "you can't sell a house that isn't yours." "Mom," she smiled in a way that was not a smile. "Everything's already handled. You signed the power of attorney last month, remember? At the bank?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Then I heard my own heartbeat like boots on an empty floor. Thomas pushed back his chair. The scrape of it silenced a few conversations 3 tables away. He stood with the care of a man who has measured a thing before touching it. "May I?" he said to no one and everyone, and walked toward the center of the room. "Thomas," Rachel said brightly, "you're about to say something tedious about the county clerk. Don't." But he was already reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket, the same jacket he wore to funerals and town meetings, and lifting out a slim leather folder. "You didn't sign anything, Evelyn," he said to me, and then he looked at Rachel. "Your mother wasn't at the bank that day. I can prove it." The word prove arrived like oxygen. Rachel's laugh was too quick. "Oh my God, we're doing this now? At dinner?" Thomas opened the folder and placed a small USB drive on the glass. It clicked like a pebble on a lake bed. "Your mother's doorbell camera," he said, "and my trail cam that faces the road, because the coyotes have been bold this year. Timestamps. The hour you say she was at the bank, she was in her front yard repairing the mailbox you backed into, then inside, making chicken soup. The same hour, your car is recorded passing our road headed north toward the bank, twice." Brian touched Rachel's sleeve. She wouldn't look at him. "This is insane," she said. "Mom, tell him. We went together. You wanted to make things easier, you said. You wanted help with bills." I remembered the way my shoulders had hurt that day from hauling wood, the grocery list folded in my sweater pocket, the way I'd taken the pot off the stove because the soup looked like it might catch. I remembered the sound of a car on the gravel drive and thinking, "Rachel," but then it kept going and I thought, "No, she isn't stopping today." I remembered the light on the kitchen table slicing across my hands. I remembered not going anywhere. "Play it," I said to Thomas, and my voice was mine again. We did not have a screen, but the manager of the restaurant, eager to please the woman with the company credit card and the table of 12, hurried out with a little projector from the back. Someone found a white wall. Someone dimmed the lights. Beside me, a busboy who could have been my grandson's age stopped mid-reach with a tray in his hands and, in the dark, the whole room became 100 pairs of listening lungs. On the wall, my front steps. The ordinary blessing of a doormat I had knit from old t-shirts, the timestamp, the yellow jacket I wore for chores, me straightening the bent mailbox post with a length of pipe, and the stubbornness that kept our barn standing through 2 hurricanes, the timestamp again, Me washing my hands at the kitchen sink, the kitchen window glinting off the mixing bowl where I'd left the bread dough to rise, the trail cam view, my road like a ribbon, a red SUV, the one Rachel drives for her real estate showings, speeding past, dust cloud behind it, then again 30 minutes later, coming the other way. The bank on Route 7 would stamp her parking ticket at 10:48 a.m., Thomas said. He had pulled the public queue footage. He had spent his last 3 evenings in the county office scrolling. People murmured in a way a field does when wind runs through it. Rachel did not sit down, and neither did I. An old habit rose in me like a wall. The impulse to protect her from consequences, to make a joke, to apologize for a mess she had made. I reached for it out of reflex, found it wasn't there, and my hand closed on air. "Turn that off," Rachel said. "This is a family matter." "It's a felony," Thomas said. Someone turned up the chandeliers. The room blinked. The projector fan purred as it cooled. Rachel's boss pressed her lips together in the polite smile of someone who is not paid enough to absorb this kind of evening. Brian stood up and then sat down again. He looked smaller than he had when we came in. "Let's not turn this into a spectacle," Rachel said, and her voice had a new edge, the edge I used to hear when she was 12 and I said no for her own good. "Mom, we'll talk later. You'll thank me when you see the place. They have a library." "Did you forge my name?" I asked, "so you could sell the house your father and I built?" For a moment, everyone heard the word father, as if I had set his photograph on the table and the glass had fogged with breath. Jack had been gone 11 years, but in that second the room looked around for him anyway, as if he might stand up from behind a chair, pull back his shoulders, and clear his throat. Rachel didn't answer my question. She put her glass down and wiped imaginary crumbs from her hands. "Everyone is making this dramatic," she said. "It's a convenience, that's all. A power of attorney is a convenience." "And a forgery is a crime," Thomas said. Rachel's boss looked relieved, then alarmed, then something like indignant. She stood, mumbled something about early calls, and started to shepherd 2 colleagues toward the door. Brian stayed in his seat and rubbed his thumb along the edge of the napkin like a man feeling for the seam of a pocket that isn't there. The manager, who had a good heart and no script for this, came over and asked if we wanted coffee. I shook my head. I had the feeling you get when you realize the ground you're standing on is ice, and you've already skated out farther than you meant to. "I'm calling the sheriff," Thomas said quietly to me, "but I wanted to let you choose how far this goes and how fast." He hesitated. "Would you like to step outside?" I nodded, not because I knew what I was doing, but because I needed air. When I stood, I expected my knees to fail me. They didn't. I tucked my chair in because I was raised by people who did that even when they were furious and heartbroken. Brian reached for Rachel's hand and missed. No one said goodbye. Outside, the June evening was one of those Vermont evenings that pretends to be spring, although it feels like fall. Cool, clean, smelling of rain and distant dirt roads. The restaurant door shut behind us, and the noise became a muffled aquarium hum. I stood under the awning and let the breath go out of me until it stopped trying to return all at once. "We can go back in," Thomas said, "or we can go home." "Home," I said. We didn't speak in the car. I watched the way the headlights made a tunnel out of Route 7, and how the edges of the tunnel softened where the maples reclined toward it. When we turned down our road, the stars were visible between the trees. The house waited like a dog who hadn't learned to be afraid yet. In the kitchen, the bread dough had risen into a smooth, pale hill. When I lifted the towel, a breath of yeast came up and hit my face and reminded me that I knew how to make something that grew when you left it alone, and something that fed people without asking them to deserve it. I pressed the dough down, and it sighed. Thomas called the sheriff from my kitchen table. He used the steady voice he used when a neighbor's fence line needed reasoning or the town requested volunteers, and nobody raised their hand. He said the words suspected forgery, elder fraud, and power of attorney used without consent. He listened for a long time, nodding at nothing, as if the nodding made the floor more solid. "Deputy will come by in the morning," he told me after he hung up. "There'll be questions. We'll print the videos again and email the files." I poured water and drank it like medicine. I keep thinking, if I had done better. "You raised a daughter who grew up to make her own choices," he said. That's not the same as you making them for her. It was easier when she was little, I said. Easier to know what to do. She would come home with a skinned knee and I would clean it. And when she cried, I could put my hand on her head and say, there, that was a cure. Later, I don't know. I worked nights to make the mortgage, and she decided the mortgage was a kind of insult. She was good in school. She wanted new shoes. I wanted this. I gestured at the house. A roof that didn't leak. A place for the wind to learn my name. Thomas's mouth made a shape like he might speak, and then he didn't. He put the USB drive in a sandwich bag and sealed it, wrote the date on it with a Sharpie he pulled from his shirt pocket, and set it by the salt. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the house the way I do when it storms, checking windows, touching door frames. The pictures on the hallway wall, Rachel in a white sweater with baby teeth missing, Rachel in a green gown with a diploma, Jack in a flannel jacket with a fish the size of a myth, watched me pass, and I felt watched over and watched both. At 4 a.m., the birds began their scratchy prelude. I went out to the porch and sat on the steps. The mailbox leaned a little less than yesterday. I thought about my hands on the pipe, about pressure and leverage and not being as frail as people think you are when your hair is white. When the deputy arrived, the sun hadn't decided yet whether today would be hot. Her name was Ortiz, and she had eyes that looked like they were good at finding lost things. We gave her the recordings, and I told the story as plainly as I could. No embroidery, no excuses. She wrote in a notebook, the paper whispering under the pen. When she asked me to describe my relationship with my daughter, I said, I love her. When she asked me when my husband died, I said, 11 years ago, and surprised myself by not crying. When she asked whether I had ever given Rachel written permission to sign for me, I said no, and felt the small dignity of that syllable settle in the room. Miss Carter, she said before she left, the sale can be put on hold if we notify the title company and provide cause. I'm going to do that as soon as I get in. You'll get a call, and we'll be speaking to the bank about the notary logs. If anything changes, you call me. Her presence drew a border around the morning. After she drove away, Thomas looked at me like a question I didn't have to answer. Do you want company? He asked. Or do you want quiet? Both, I said. But quiet first. He nodded, the way he nods when he leaves firewood by my steps without knocking. When I was alone, I made coffee and stood holding the mug without drinking it. The house made its human noises, the tick of the baseboard, the soft groan of wood remembering winter. I found the envelope Rachel had brought me at Christmas, with 2 tickets to a cruise I had never used because the dates were the week the pipes burst in the cellar. I thought about all the kindnesses she had gotten bored of halfway through and how many of them I had finished by myself. Around noon, the phone rang. This is Lila from North Meadow Title, a bright voice said. Deputy Ortiz has been in touch. We're placing an immediate hold on the Carter property closing pending investigation. We'll be requesting confirmation of the power of attorney from your attorney of record. I don't have an attorney of record, I said. I do not have an attorney. There was a pause. Then the voice lost a little of its brightness and gained courage. Then someone is pretending to be your attorney. We'll CC you on every email from now on, Miss Carter. I'm sorry this is happening. We'll do it right. By evening, the paper in town had it on their website in the language of journalism that lets a reader feel informed without feeling complicit. Local elder fraud investigation pauses controversial property sale. They used a picture of my mailbox in their header, which made me laugh because I had straightened it only yesterday, and now it was my avatar. Rachel called. I let it ring. She texted, and the texts arrived like hail, loud, then loud again, as if volume were a kind of proof. Mom, pick up. You're making this worse. You don't understand real estate. You are sabotaging me. Brian is furious. That man from next door is a busybody. You always did like him more than me. I put the phone in a drawer and went out to weed the carrots. 2 days later, Deputy Ortiz called to say the bank's notary log showed a signature, but the signature was already suspect. The notary who had stamped the paper, one Miss Hatch, was being asked to meet with investigators. The camera at the bank's desk had recorded a woman with hair the color of mine wearing a yellow jacket similar to mine, but the frame rate was slow, the lens foggy, and the footage good enough for gossip, but not for court. The fraud was clever in the lazy way frauds are clever. More effort spent on pretense than on honesty. Rachel finally came by on the 4th day. She didn't text first. She pulled into the driveway too fast, stopped too close to the steps, and slammed the car door with the belligerent carelessness of someone trying to remind the air who it belongs to. When I opened the door, she was already on the porch. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't step back to let her in. "We can talk here." She looked past me into the house as if the house could be convinced to take her side. "It wasn't supposed to be a big deal," she said. "You don't need all that land. You fall. You don't tell me. You pretend you're fine. I am trying to be proactive." "Rachel," I said, "did you forge my signature?" She touched her hair as if she were adjusting a crown. "I had a friend help," she said. "You signed once before on a medical form." "That was a HIPAA release," I said, surprised the term came to my tongue. "So a doctor could speak with you on the phone when I had that dizzy spell in January. It had nothing to do with selling my house. It had everything to do with you listening when you were worried." She looked at the sky as if she might find a better answer printed on it. "You always make me out to be the bad guy," she said. "You live like a pioneer. It's 2025. People don't live like this anymore." "I live in a way that has a door that opens," I said, "and a table that fits you, if you want to sit at it. That's the kind of 2025 I am." "This is ridiculous," she said. "Brian says I should stop trying to reason with you." I felt sudden pity for Brian. "How is Brian?" She flinched. He's fine. His parents are humiliated." I thought about the dinner table, about his hand missing her hand, and felt not vindication, but a small mourning for who they might have been if they had learned a different sentence to live by. "If you want to fix this," I said, "you can call Deputy Ortiz and tell her exactly who helped you. You can call Miss Hatch and tell her you are sorry. You can call North Meadow Title and withdraw any claim to represent me. You can call the bank and tell them what you told me." Her face changed. She looked older and younger at once, like a child at the moment she realizes the grown-up she is speaking to is not going to bend. "I could go to prison," she said. "You could," I said. "And I could have lost my home. We are both standing at the end of a road we should never have driven down. You are the one with the keys." She stared at me a long moment, her eyes searching my face for the mother who would rescue her from herself. I kept my hand on the doorframe because I was the one who needed the rescue, and the frame was solid. Then she turned, went down the steps too fast, and drove away, sending stones clicking against the underside of her car like just before rain. In the weeks that followed, the investigation did what investigations do. Papers were copied. People were interviewed. Rachel's boss let her go with a statement about conflicts of integrity. Brian returned the deposit to the caterer and stayed with his sister for a while 2 towns over. The notary, Miss Hatch, hired a lawyer who said in the paper that Miss Hatch had been duped by a convincing impersonation and regretted the oversight. The county attorney used words like probation possible and restitution likely. I moved through the days in the old rhythms that had kept me alive since Jack died. Bread on Sundays, laundry on Mondays, garden on Tuesdays, soup for whoever knocked on Wednesdays. I added a new rhythm without meaning to, answering calls from women I didn't know who had read the piece in the paper and wanted to tell me their stories. A voice from Milton that said her son had borrowed her credit card and never returned it, and how do you ask for it back without losing a son? A voice from St. Albans that said her daughter had made her sign something at the kitchen table that turned out to be a quit claim deed, or a quit claim, she couldn't remember how it was spelled, and now the daughter was renting the apartment back to her mother. A voice from Shelburne that said her niece had helped her downsize, and the boxes had gone to a storage unit that accidentally went to auction. "I'm sorry," I said to each one, because there was no other beginning. After that, I listened. When I hung up, I sat at the table and stared at the knot in the wood that looks like a galaxy. Listening felt like sweeping a church. One afternoon, after I'd spent 20 minutes helping a woman look up the number for legal aid and another 10 just breathing with her until her voice unclenched, my phone rang again. It was Thomas. "I've been thinking," he said, which for Thomas was code for "I have already measured the lumber twice and cut it once. You're doing the job of 3 organizations from your kitchen table." "I'm making phone calls," I said. "You're building a place," he said. "You just can't see it yet." He asked me to meet him at the coffee shop in town, the one with the crooked chalkboard where the owner wrote poems between the day's special. He was already there when I walked in, sitting by the window with a folder so full of paper it made the metal chair look fragile. "Before you tell me I'm out of line," he said, smiling in a way that allowed for me to say exactly that, "just look." He slid the folder across the table and I read the top title, North Star House, Proposal. Underneath, floor plans for a place that looked like a big old farmhouse with its heart widened. Common room, kitchen with 3 stoves, pantry, laundry the size of a small chapel, offices small enough not to feel official, 6 bedrooms with doors that locked and light that fell like understanding, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides like an arm. Notes in the margins, local contractors, grants we might apply for, volunteers from the high school shop class, a church that had already offered folding chairs. "I don't have money," I said, as if money were the only language this country understood. "I know," he said. "I do, a little. And I know people who have it and want it to do something besides sit and grow like moss on a stone. I also know how to apply for more, but I don't have what you have." "What do I have?" "You have women calling your kitchen from 3 counties because they trust the way you say hello," he said. "You have a voice that makes people stand up straighter without realizing they did. You have a way of saying you're not alone that makes the room believe it." "I bake bread," I said. It came out as a protest and a prayer. "Good," he said. "We'll need bread." We talked for 2 hours. We argued for 15 minutes about whether the common room needed a fireplace. It did. He wanted a pellet stove. I said fire, real fire, the kind that behaves if you ask it right and earns its heat. We listed all the ways the plan could fail. Permits denied, neighbors worried about parking, donors bored, the wrong people showing up and breaking what we built with their need. We listed all the ways it could work. Slow, careful, no miracles, just one woman at a time discovering her hands were still hers. At the end, he said, "I'm not asking you to run an empire. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are on purpose." I slept with the folder under the bed like a child with a treasure, not because I feared theft, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it in the room while I dreamed. In the morning, when I lifted it out and the paper smell met me, I felt something I had not felt since the day Jack and I first turned the key on this house and the rooms answered by echoing our names. Purpose. We found a building faster than I expected. It was a long, low place on the edge of town, once a paint store, then a yoga studio, then nothing for a while. The landlord, a man named Dennis who had owned it so long he talked about it the way you talk about a relative you love but cannot live with, liked the idea of elder women repainting the walls with colors they chose themselves. He liked the number Thomas offered for rent too, especially when Thomas said he could guarantee it for 2 years up front from a small foundation with a name that sounded like a joke but wasn't, the Daffodil Fund. We scrubbed for a week. Volunteers showed up in waves. A teenager with a skateboard who cleaned the baseboards as if they were the deck of a beloved boat. A retired nurse who labeled every cabinet with the neat handwriting of someone who believes in systems. A man with a ponytail who repaired 3 outlets and told us about his mother, who had died alone because everyone was too polite to insist on company. We painted the walls the color of cream and the trim the color of the sky on a day you think might be the day God had in mind when she invented blue. We set up 6 beds with quilts that had been living in people's closets for decades, waiting for a purpose that was not a guest who would never come. We put a hook by each door for a robe and a doorstop under each door for when a door needed to stay open a while. We put a sign by the sink that said, "If you wash, you rest. If you eat, you rinse. If you cry, you are allowed." We called it North Star House, not because we wanted to be cute, but because it sounded like direction that didn't move. We made rules the way you make bread, with patience and amendment, and a recipe you only learn by doing wrong a few times. The first rule was simple: no one touches your mail but you. The second was simple too, and harder sometimes. If you are cruel to someone here, you will be asked to leave. You can come back when you are ready to not be cruel. On the day we opened, the sky did what Vermont skies do, threatened rain, then grinned sunshine, then remembered it had promised rain. People came anyway. A state rep came with a scarf that looked expensive and a speech that was better than I wanted it to be. A local reporter came with a camera and a face that was earnest enough to forgive the camera. Women came. The first 6 occupants, shy as deer, carrying the pieces of their lives in bags too small for their story. A pillow, a dish, a photograph of a man on a motorcycle, a box of letters, a radio. We checked them in without asking them to prove what they had lost. By nightfall, 2 of the women were in the common room sharing a deck of cards and the low, companionable silence that is the opposite of loneliness. Someone left a dish of strawberries by the sink with a note that said, "Take one, they're sweet." In the office, the phone line blinked like a patient heartbeat, the calls still coming, now with a place to point at when the caller asked, "Where should I go?" Rachel didn't call that first week. I didn't look for her car on my road. The investigation ground forward. The county attorney called one evening and used the words plea and first offense and diversion. It turned out Rachel's friend who helped worked in a title office 2 towns over and had done something like this before, only smaller, only for a car loan that began with a mother's signature and ended with a mother's stunned face. There would be community service. There would be fines. There would be a line in a record that a judge could erase if the years that followed were gentle. I lay in my bed at home and stared at the ceiling and felt grief arrive like a careful animal. It didn't maul. It curled up by the bed and laid its head on its paws and watched me, waiting for me to look back. I did. I said, "I know," into the dark, and grief, satisfied, closed its eyes for a while and slept. 2 months into North Star House, someone from a local TV station called. "We heard about your kitchen rule," the producer said, "the one about crying." "Lots of kitchens have that rule," I said. "Not a lot of kitchens are open to it." They came on a Wednesday afternoon and filmed a pot of soup. They made me stand by the window in the light and answer questions that made me feel both proud and like I was touching a bruise. What does safety look like to you? How do you forgive what you can't forget? What do you tell a woman who says she doesn't want to be a burden? That the word burden needs to be unlearned, I said, like a song we sang as children that turned out to be mean. I tell her that carrying and being carried is how we were meant to move through the world. The segment aired on a Friday night. On Saturday, a church group stopped by with 3 slow cookers and a bucket of flowers. On Sunday, a man in a suit no one had asked him to wear came with a check for $500 and told me he had been cruel to his grandmother and had only realized it after she died. He wanted to be forgiven and thought maybe money could be a kind of apology until he figured out how to apologize in person to someone else. In between the good things, there were the hard things. One woman left in the middle of the night because the kindness felt like a trap. Another left a note on the pillow that said, "I don't deserve this," which I kept in my office drawer and sometimes took out and answered aloud even though she would never read it again. Someone accused someone of stealing a sweater, and the accusation cracked the room like a dropped plate until the sweater was found under a chair with a cat kneading its paws on it like bread. Rachel called after the TV piece. "I saw you," she said. "You looked good." "Thank you," I said. "I wanted to tell you I'm doing the community service," she said. "They put me at the women's shelter in Burlington. I filed toothpaste for 2 hours and cried in the janitor's closet. I start therapy Monday." "I'm glad," I said. "I don't want you to think I'm doing it because of the court," she said. "I mean, I am also, but I would have done it anyway." "Then it will have 2 meanings," I said. "Those are the best kinds of actions." "Mom," she said after a moment, "do you hate me?" I looked at the window screen and the way it made the world into a small honeycomb of squares. "I have never hated you," I said. "I have been afraid for you. Sometimes I have been afraid of you." "I know," she said. "I knew it even while I was still pretending your fear was prejudice. Would it be all right if I called sometimes to ask how your day is? I won't ask you for anything. I want to know what your life is like when I am not ruining it." "You can call," I said. "I might not always answer, not because I don't want to hear your voice, because I don't want to train you to expect it." "That's fair," she said. She sounded older. Or maybe she sounded exactly her age for the first time. I told her the truth, that today we had burned a pan of onions, and you could still smell the ghost of them. That a woman named Joan had taught us how to fold fitted sheets as if they were secrets. That a man with a ponytail had come back to fix a door that didn't need fixing just to check on his memories. I told her I had laughed twice. really laughed, the kind that hurts your stomach and forgives something you didn't mean to keep remembering. I told her I had cried once and no one tried to stop me because the rule is that you can cry. Okay, she said. Okay. We did this for a while. She called. I answered sometimes. She told me about the shelter and how women showed up with bags that clanked because the bottles weren't empty yet. She told me about a girl barely 20 who came in with a bruise like a coastline around her eye, and how she had stood in front of the mirror and said, "I look like a map," and laughed in a way that made Rachel excuse herself and pray in the supply closet without knowing she still remembered how to pray. Rachel told me she had dreams about the house where she walked from room to room, apologizing to furniture, to floors, to the mailbox, to the nail where Jack's hat used to hang. Fall came like a confession. The trees along the road to North Star House changed their minds all at once. We started putting apples into everything we ate. Someone brought a radio, and we listened to baseball, the voices of men describing a small white thing's journey through space as if it mattered. And it did, somehow. It mattered the way small, steady things matter when large things have been too heavy to hold. On a Tuesday in October, Brian came by. He waited in the parking lot, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers as if they were a prop he hadn't rehearsed with. He saw me and looked down like a kid in trouble, and then looked up like a man who had decided to be brave. "I wanted to say," he began, and then stopped, because wanting and saying are two different sports. "It was a lot," I said, which was a way of saving him the humiliation of narrating the whole mess. "It was," he said. Rachel told me she's been helping at the shelter. She says she's working on herself. I want to believe her. I also want to not be stupid again." "Both things can be true," I said. "Belief and caution." He nodded. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the dinner, for not standing up sooner, for not seeing sooner, for not knowing what to call it when I did see." "Sometimes things don't need a name right away," I said. "Sometimes they just need a door you can close and then open again." He handed me the flowers. "These are for you," he said. "I know they're not your garden. They're something." "They're lovely," I said. And they were, because they were given from a place people get to by walking through embarrassment and staying upright. That winter was the kind of winter Jack and I used to take pride in surviving. The paths to the parking lot were a map of white decision-making. The plow went by and buried the end of the driveway in a wall of tire-trenched ice, and we dug it out not because we love digging out, but because the digging out makes the world passable again. In the common room, women knit hats and told stories in the rope of voice you get when you've told a story 50 times and it isn't boring yet. It's just true. At home, when the wind blew, the old farmhouse sang its winter song in the rafters, a low, comfortable complaint. I slept under 2 quilts and 1 old army blanket and woke with my nose cold and my heart clean. In March, a letter came from the county attorney. It said the words I had expected and the ones I had not known to expect, that the plea was accepted, that Rachel would complete 200 hours of service, that the notary had accepted a censure and agreed to take a training she should never have needed in the first place. That restitution would be paid for the legal costs North Meadow Title had incurred, that the false power of attorney was null and void. The letter said one more thing, too, tucked into a sentence as if it were not both freight and freighted. The defendant has written a statement of apology to you and asks that it be delivered. I did not open it right away. I took the letter and the apology into the barn, where we keep the smell of hay, even though the hay is gone, and set them on the workbench where Jack used to sharpen every blade until it could be depended on. I stood there and breathed in sawdust that had not been made for 11 years, and then I opened the apology. It was short. It said, "I did not love you the way I pretended I did. I loved what you gave me, and I resented you for giving it. I thought love was something that should never ask me to stop being the main character. I am learning I am not even in every scene. I am sorry. I hope someday to be allowed to carry something heavy for you just because it is heavy and not because it is mine." I sat down on the stool and let the words be words. Then I put the apology in a folder in my desk at North Star House, where I keep documents I may need to take out and reread to remind myself that change is a thing that happens in inches, and never because you stare at it and demand it hurry. I did not forgive Rachel all at once, because forgiveness is not an event. It is a weather system. It didn't arrive. It gathered. One day I realized the thing I had been carrying in my chest for so long had become lighter, not because she had changed, though she had, but because I had set down the piece that was mine to set down, the hope that I could make her into the person I wanted her to be if I just learned the right sentence. The second year of North Star House was bigger. We added 2 beds. We started a small thrift room where everything was free, and the only rule was that you couldn't take more than you could carry for 5 minutes without putting it down. We added a Wednesday morning group we called Practical Magic, where the magic was practical. How to read a lease, how to say no on the phone to someone who wants you to yes, how to talk to a doctor who thinks he already knows your story. A woman who had not learned to write a check at 60 learned, and the day she paid her electric bill with a flourish and a stamp, she danced in place in the office in a way that made the room make a sound people sometimes make at weddings. We got a letter from a foundation in Boston that wanted to give us money not because we asked, but because someone had told them about the rule that you can cry in the kitchen. They came to visit and cried in the kitchen and wrote another check before they left. I learned to be good at something I had thought I would hate, asking for money. I learned to ask without apology, because the apologies had been used up in places that didn't deserve them. One afternoon in July, a bus pulled into the parking lot with the sound of a bus that needs to retire, and 3 women stepped off and hugged me like they had always known me. They had driven from upstate New York because they had seen the TV piece online and had copied our rules and wanted to see if they were doing it right. If you're kind and firm at the same time, I said, you're doing it right. If you're tired in a way that feels worthwhile, you're doing it right. The day Rachel told me Brian was getting married, we were shelling peas on the back steps. She held a pea pod like a small, bright animal. He's marrying a woman who teaches 3rd graders to read, she said. She wears cardigans and has a laugh like a bell. I saw a picture on his sister's page. How do you feel? I asked, because questions are more polite than advice. I feel like the version of me that would have been a good wife to him didn't exist yet when he needed her, she said. And that's not his fault. That's a lot of understanding, I said. I had help, she said, and patted my knee, not in apology, but in solidarity. In the fall of that year, our porch needed repair. The boards had warped where the rain's patience had found a weakness. Thomas came with tools and a young man named Caleb who wanted to learn how to make something that wouldn't fall down. We took the boards up and found the surprise you often find under boards, a small ecosystem of things that live in dark and eat what is left for them. We didn't judge. We swept them into the yard and let the wind sort them. We laid new boards and I hammered the nails in a rhythm that made Rachel smile when she walked by. You still hum when you hammer, she said. I know, I said. It gets the job done. In December, the woman who had left the note on the pillow came back and asked if we had room for a week. I'm not very good at being taken care of, she said. Good, I said. We're not very good at taking over. We prefer taking turns. She stayed 2 weeks and left a note on the counter that said, "Thank you for not asking me to repent in a way that made you feel good." She had drawn a small star beside the words that looked like a compass. 2 years after that dinner where my daughter raised her glass and showed me where I stood in her constellation, I stood in front of a room full of people at the public library in Burlington to talk about North Star House for a series they called Local Miracles. I wanted to tell them that miracle was not the word, that what we had built was simply a room where the doors were open and the rules were fair. I told them instead a story about a woman who came to us on a Tuesday with a paper bag of pills and a list of instructions written by a woman at a clinic who had been kind but overwhelmed, and how we sat with her and made a calendar and a tray and a ritual out of taking the pills so it wouldn't be a chore, but an act of communion with her own continued life. People cried, people laughed, people handed me their cards, people promised things I hoped they would keep. After the talk, in the echo of the library's bright acoustics, Rachel appeared. She wasn't wearing makeup. She had a book in her hand that was not a prop. She looked like a person I would have liked even if I had not given birth to her. "Mom," she said, "do you have 10 minutes?" "We can walk," I said. We walked down Church Street where the lights were already pretending it was Christmas. A busker played something that wanted to be Leonard Cohen and wasn't, but that was more than fine. We stopped by the fountain, which was off for winter and full of sky. Rachel put her hands in her coat pockets and did the thing she used to do as a girl when she knew she was going to say something honest, tilted her head as if listening to her better self giving instructions. "I have been in therapy now for 22 months, she said. "I've learned I am a person who gets scared and then pretends the fear is bravery by making big decisions. I've learned that my anger at you was a way to cover up my guilt. I've learned that I thought if I could move you like a chess piece, I would win a game I had made up by myself. I want to ask for your forgiveness without asking you to put down the part of your hurt that belongs to me." "I hear you," I said. "That's a lot of learning." She nodded. "I'm not done. I may never be done. I'm okay with that. I don't want you to have to be okay with it. I just want you to know I am." "Okay," I said. We stood there and let the cold air do what cold air does, teach you where your edges are and where your heat is. "I started a program at the community college," she said after a minute. "Social work eventually. For now, it's just Communication 101 and statistics, which is making me reassess my life choices, but also a class on nonprofit administration. I want to be useful in a way that doesn't make me the center of the usefulness." "You will be good at it," I said. "I will be a beginner," she said, "and that will be good for me." We walked back to the library. She hugged me, then pulled away, then hugged me again like a person who had learned that hugging is not something you deserve. It is something you participate in. "I love you," she said. "I love you," I said. The sentence landed this time not like ice, not like a demand, but like a hand offered across a table. At home that night, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder with the apology letter and tucked that night's library flyer into the pocket. The folder was thick now, notes from women who had left and written back, pictures of quilts, a recipe and 3 handwritings for a casserole, so forgiving it held together even when the person who made it did not. I closed the folder and put it in the drawer with the tea towels and thought about how sometimes the place you store what matters is not a safe or a fireproof box, but a drawer you open every day so nothing gets too sacred to touch. On the 2nd anniversary of North Star House, we held a celebration, not a gala, a potluck. We made a list of what people could bring, and the list filled itself. Someone brought pickles they had made with dill grown in a pot on a windowsill. Someone brought a cake with the word hope written on it, in letters that tilted a little. Someone brought a photo album full of before and after pictures of houseplants that had revived just because someone watered them on purpose. I stood at the end of the table and said a few words because people asked me to. I told them the truth I knew now, the way I knew my own name, that family is not a word that can be taken away from you by someone who is careless with it. It is a thing that grows wherever you do the dishes together. It is built in the time you take to ask a person how they slept, and then listen to the part where they say, "Not great," and you don't try to fix it with a story about your uncle who slept on rocks in the army. It is the quiet you keep when someone cries and just needs a napkin, not a lesson. It is the bread you make because you remembered to leave it alone long enough to rise, and then remembered to punch it down, and it forgave you for both. Rachel arrived late, carrying a bowl of something that steamed happiness into the room. She set it down and went to work like someone who had learned that work is not a punishment, but a privilege when it is done in a place that loves you. She didn't try to commandeer anything. She refilled the water pitcher. She sat next to a woman who was eating slowly and told her about a podcast she liked that had nothing to do with improving oneself and everything to do with laughing out loud at nothing. After the tables had been cleared and the floor swept and the last woman had gone to bed with a book, Rachel and I stood in the doorway and watched the empty common room, the way you watch a theater after the show when the set is still up and the stories are still floating like dust in the stage lights. "I'm not asking you to forget," she said. "I am asking you to let me keep showing up." "That's all I ask," I said, "that you show up and you keep showing up, and that if you can't one day, you tell me, that you don't turn me into a test I have to pass to keep you." "I can do that," she said. "I am doing that." We locked the door. We turned off the lights. We stood under the night sky that had spent all day practicing for this performance. "Look," Rachel said, and pointed north. The star we had named a house after was there, not brighter than the others, just more consistent. In the morning, I woke up before the sun. I went to the kitchen because kitchens are where mornings belong. I set water to boil and measured grounds with gravity. I took out flour and salt and yeast and made a well because that is how you begin bread, by making space in the middle for what will change it. I poured warm water in and stirred with my hand because hands know better than spoons how much is too much. I turned the dough onto the counter and pressed and folded and pressed and folded until it pushed back like a promise. I set it in a bowl and covered it with a towel that had been washed 100 times. I wrote a note on the whiteboard for whoever walked in. Back at 9, dough rising. Do not worry if it looks like it isn't. It is. On my way out, I passed the office where we keep the cards Rachel had made, the plumber, the lawyer, the mechanic, the church. I ran my fingers along the edges of the file and felt, with a quiet that reached all the way to the bones, that it was going to be okay. Not perfect, not untroubled. Okay the way a path is okay when someone has walked it before you and left the snow packed down enough to see where your foot goes next. I drove home the back way, the way Jack liked because it put the river on our right in the morning and on our left at night like two different kinds of companionship. I parked by the barn and went inside and smelled the winter we had survived and the spring we were inventing. I stood in the doorway and said into the empty air, "We did it," meaning we survived. We built something. We didn't let the worst moment decide what the rest of our lives would be called. The house answered me the way houses answer the people who have cared for them. It creaked and settled and made the sound old wood makes when the heat kicks on and the cold kicks back. It sounded like thank you. It sounded like you're welcome. It sounded like home. That afternoon, after lunch had been made and eaten and laughed over and cleaned up, a woman I didn't know came to the door of North Star House holding a paper grocery bag like a talisman. She had the look of a person almost ready to admit that she needs more than pride can carry. I opened the door and all the way and stepped aside because that is what you do when you want to tell the truth without words. "Is this the place?" she asked. "It is," I said. "I don't have much," she said, lifting the bag a little as if I might weigh it with my eyes. "You have enough," I said. "Come in, there's soup. There's bread in the oven. There are people who will remember your name the second time you say it and the third time too." She hesitated. "I'm not very good at asking for help," she said. "That's okay," I said. "We're very good at offering it." She came in. The door closed behind her. The room did the rest, the way rooms do when they are arranged not just with furniture but with intention. Someone handed her a bowl. Someone else pointed to a seat. Someone put the kettle on without being asked. The woman sat down and took a breath that sounded like it was the first one she'd taken all day. I went to the oven and opened the door. The bread had risen and browned into the shape that means the inside will be soft. I tapped it with a fingernail and it made the sound I love more than almost any sound, a hollow, modest note, the sound of readiness. I turned it out onto a rack and it cracked in the way bread cracks when it's telling you it will forgive you for cutting it too soon, even though you should wait. I cut a heel anyway, buttered it, and handed it to the woman with the bag. She took a bite and closed her eyes. "Oh," she said. "I forgot what this feels like. I forgot what—" "What?" I asked. "Being fed," she said, "without being measured." "Get used to it," I said, and we both smiled at the audacity of that promise, and also at the fact that here, of all places, it could be true. The afternoon went on. The phone rang and we answered it. The door opened and we opened it. The day did what days do when the work is the right work. It passed and it stayed both. At sunset, I stood on the porch and watched the sky try on its evening colors. Rachel pulled into the lot and parked straight for once. She got out, waved at me, and came up the steps with a bag of oranges and a grin. "I got a deal," she said. £10 for $5. "You always were good at finding arrows that pointed to yes," I said. She laughed. "I'm learning where to point them." We went inside, where the room smelled like bread and oranges and women telling the truth. Someone turned the radio to a station that played songs older than all of us, and someone else hummed, and someone else cried, and nobody tried to fix it. I stood in the doorway a moment longer and watched the life we had built behave exactly like life should. Messy, kind, ordinary, miraculous. If you had told me, On the night my daughter raised a glass and announced the sale of my home as if it were a fact of weather, that I would stand here 2 years later and say, without irony, that it was the beginning of the part where I learned who I was, I would have asked you to leave me alone with my grief. I would have wanted to keep my humiliation the way you keep a flame in a jar when you're afraid the dark will win. But here's the thing about jars and flames and darkness. You can't light anyone else's way if you leave the lid on. You take it off and the air remembers what to do, and pretty soon there's enough light to see the step in front of you, and then the one after that, and then, God help us, the ones that lead to a door with a sign above it that says home, and you realize you wrote it by accident by showing up and sweeping and letting yourself be held. Rachel caught my eye from across the room and lifted an orange as if to toast. I lifted a wooden spoon and toasted back. We grinned like conspirators, which, in a way, we were, conspiring not to let the worst of us have the last word. The kettle whistled, the bread cooled, the first star showed itself in the window like a tradition. The day ended as most good days do, with the feeling that tomorrow, if we are lucky and careful, we will get to do it again.